finding the silver lining doesn't mean that this isn't exceptionally hard, and it doesn't mean that you're not losing out on a whole lot of things right now.
All right, joining me now is clinical psychologist Dr. Erin Hunter. She's also the interim director of the University Center for the Child and the Family at the University of Michigan. Erin, it's great to see you again.
It is great to see you again, Christy, as well.
All right. You've been helping so many families, kids and parents through this, and you've also been helping us at One Detroit as we've been able to put some of your words of wisdom out there and as we all navigate this new world. And the one thing I wanted to talk about today is working with our kids now that the announcement is there's no more face-to-face school for the rest of the year. I feel even with my kids at home, there's been a sense of grief, even though we're talking about a situation where people are dying. This is a pandemic, but the grief of not being able to go back in place of where they were for the rest of the year. Talk to us a little bit about how we can talk to our kids about that.
Well, and I think that word grief, we are in this really crazy making situation, right? The world has basically been turned upside down, and the things that we could rely on and that were predictable, not that is all gone, because there are still predictable things, but that just the normal schedule and kind of what you would expect is a little bit out the window. And we're finding ourselves having to do a heck of a lot of flexible problem solving in every moment, what I found. And that, and that's wearing, right? Adjusting to a new schedule is hard, and then continuing to adjust. And even with the schools that, I know that it is hard to hear as someone who has two kids in elementary schools, like that's a hard message to hear. It's a hard thing to think about, not just a few weeks, but now months of trying to manage all of the things. And to a certain extent, I also noticed that I personally felt a sense of relief at getting that announcement, because I didn't have to keep waiting to hear what the next word was.
Yeah, now you knew what to plan for. Yeah.
And again, don't get me wrong. It is hard. It's going to be hard on families. It's going to be even harder on some than others, because this is not hitting people in an equitable way in any way, shape, or form.
No, it isn't.
But I think related to that is that what is hard is that when people are getting sick and when people are dying, when they're it's easy to get into this game of like, but other people have it worse than I do.
So my feelings aren't valid.
Right. Like I have no right to feel the way that I'm feeling. Why am I sad about the fact that we don't have any ice cream and I can't get any more, which I'm going with like what seems to be a more trivial thing. But I will say that I personally, like, that could potentially bring me to tears, because it could be the thing that just tips me over the edge.
Right.
I've had this long day, I've been doing all these things. I go and open up the drawer and what? Someone ate the last of the ice cream. Mm-hmm. And so on one hand, like, who really cares if I have ice cream? But on the other hand, that again, it's not just about that. It's kind of about what it represents. And what that represents is like, I can't just go out to the store easily. I can't just run out and grab it, because I have to be thoughtful about that and the social distancing recommendations. And when we think about that, particularly for our kids, and for kids and parents and everyone out there, we are dealing with many, many losses, which is grief, right? We have the loss of our normal schedule. We have the loss of our sports season. My kid doesn't get to play soccer with his team this fall, and it'll be fine. And it's still sad, and it's hard, and he's been looking forward to that. Mm-hmm. And that, especially if you want to talk about anybody that would be, graduating from one level to the next. So a fifth grader going on to middle school and wanting to finish that up, an eighth grader, like losing out on some of the end of the middle school, and then high school, seniors that are grieving the loss of, their last bit of time. And again, we can still connect, and we can still, there are ways to kind of make the best of it. And I still think looking to find the silver lining, but finding the silver lining doesn't mean that this isn't exceptionally hard. And it doesn't mean that you're not losing out on a whole lot of things right now.
So is it, Erin, then being comfortable with those feelings or acknowledging those feelings?
I would actually say that now more than ever, it is very important to let yourself and your family members and your other loved ones just have their feelings. feelings are not problems. Feelings are just, I mentioned this last time too, but feelings are messages that our body is sending us. And we're going to have a whole lot of messages in our feelings inbox right now because we're dealing with so much and we're experiencing so many losses. And really, we are experiencing a trauma. And this trauma isn't happening to one person or a small group of people. This trauma is happening in our society. And I'm using the word trauma specifically because it really is traumatic what we're going through. So there's going to be lots of feelings, and people are going to be behaving in ways where it's hard to make sense of. You know, like, why are you being short with me? Or why are you doing this? Because things don't make sense right now, and people aren't responding in a way that makes sense. And you're going to have feelings that are up, down, and all around. And it's important to just let those feelings be. The feelings just need to be heard. So and if you ignore them, they'll get louder.
So do you make kids talk about it? Do you say it's okay if you don't want to talk about it, or say, I know you might be feeling things? Give us a little bit of guidance.
Yeah, no, and I think that the language is hard. And what I'll say is, in general, I don't recommend forcing anyone to do or talk about anything they don't want to, because that's not going to end up working out well. I think that it's about creating space for thinking about, for having those feelings. And it's maybe like, just offering, like, do you want to talk about what's going on? Or like, what feelings are you having about all of this? And sometimes it's nice to have it like, and I think offering it in multiple ways, for some, especially younger kids, I think having, and it doesn't have to be a big, deep, we're going to have an hour-long session about feelings. Sometimes it's even just like there's a lot going on right now, and we're going to have a lot of feelings, and that's okay. All of your feelings are okay to have. And you don't necessarily need to say more. And at times there might be more questions. And there's going to be some, especially with like older kids and teenagers, where you could even start a little bit of a journal or email or text back and forth, like, hey, what's going on? Because sometimes it's more comfortable to let out feelings not face to face, because that feels really vulnerable. It might be easier in a written form versus in a face-to-face. So I think it's just really about creating opportunities and just letting feelings be, because they are gonna be.
Is there anything to, sometimes we use the word closure, and that can be a really vague word, but for kids that maybe needed to end the school year, or will be ending different interactions, or will never be back in that one place that they were, is there anything that we can do for them or encourage them to express?
Another very excellent and important question. Just related to the word closure, we're not going to be able to have closure at this point because we're not done with it. We're still in the middle of it, so there's not going to be true closure. And at the same time, there really are things that we can do. When you think about what is laid out in the school year, and even like a graduation ceremony or a prom, in some ways it's a ritual. It's this thing that happens every year that you can kind of look forward to, where there's a little bit of like ceremony and making it special. And if you take kind of that core essence of some of these things, you can do that even at home. So if you were going to be graduating this year, maybe you can set up a Zoom meeting and have family be there and say something. And you know what? You get to be valedictorian. Maybe you don't want to give a speech. Maybe you want to do an interpretive dance. But I think that still having a ritual to honor the transition that is happening and to honor the space that they're in. And again, that can look a whole bunch of different ways. But maybe it's even like, families can write up a little graduation certificate for their fifth grader. Congratulations on completing fifth grade. We're all so proud of you. And make some cookies, or, but like do something to make it special. Because I do think that rituals are very important in helping us move from one space to the next, and giving us at least eventually that sense of closure, although it might not be felt immediately. This is going to be an ongoing process.
I guess my last question for you would be, we've kind of gone into the time of year when usually kids and family schedules then become packed with all of the different things. And it feels like we live our life on this busyness. And, we're so busy. We've got to go from one thing. And now suddenly it has stopped. and it feels like maybe we're rewiring ourselves a little bit. What are your thoughts, and you and your colleagues talking about this at the U of M, about how we might be rewiring a generation of kids, and the way we go about doing things in our world?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, like how this is going to change our society. Like, we're not going to come out of this the same as we went into this. And in some ways, we've been rewiring ourselves as a society over the last 10 or 15 years with all the ways that we use technology, right? So that rewiring has been happening. And in some ways, how I see this is a little bit of a pause. Now, clearly, we're all using even more technology than we were before. Right. And technology is not bad. So if there are parents that are like uber concerned about screen time, again, you are perfectly justified to develop whatever rules that you have for your family about that. But in some ways, I think that this is a pause to think about how are we to what purpose are we using this technology, and what is core to us in terms of the meaning. And I do hope that people are able to at least pause. And pause doesn't mean finding joy and delight in it. It just means thinking about, how do I want to use this? And when we are back into a more normal space, how do we want to engage? What do we appreciate about being slowed down? What do we miss about doing the things? But maybe we can come out of this in a little bit more of a balanced sense. And I think even tying this question back into what we were talking about before, with even like some of the grieving, that I also feel like people are still, our society has evolved where we try to do a whole lot and we're multitasking all the time. And,
right.
Go. And it's like school and then soccer and then piano lessons. And, then we're going to call and talk to grandma. And even now, like, there's going to be kids who you want to socially connect, but maybe they just don't enjoy this way of connecting with people. And that's okay. My hope is that people can, even use a space. I think that there's a little bit of a myth out there right now that, this is a time to be really productive. Look, we've got all this downtime. And I'll say this again, we're in a trauma. People don't tend to be productive in a trauma. And the mantra that I've come up with that I keep telling myself is, I don't need to thrive, I need to survive. And even taking the edge off. And again, in terms of the rewiring and who we want to be after this, like letting yourself pause. And in that space where you're allowing yourself to come back to your basic, like survival, let's just get through, and taking off some of the multitudes of expectations that we put on ourselves.
Yeah, the pressure.
Lots of pressure. Where do we want to be at the end? And not in a pressure-filled way of like, oh, I have to be amazing, but maybe again, like, what do I want to choose for myself when I have more choices? Because we don't have as many choices, but we will in the future again. So again, I think that this could actually create a generation that has a little bit of a different perspective on things, and really they might be able to appreciate some of the things that we take for granted. I know I took many things for granted that I'm now like, oh, I actually enjoyed going to the grocery store, although I would complain about it. It's like the little things. Like I took a picture of a daffodil growing out in my backyard, which I honestly might not have noticed it in the past, but now I'm like, oh, it's a beautiful yellow flower. And
it's the little things.
Yeah. And letting the little things carry you through. This is not a time for big things necessarily. Again, if you want to use productivity as a coping strategy, that's completely fine. I've definitely played into that myself a bit, but reminding yourself this is a marathon and not a sprint. And if you keep trying to be productive, if you keep putting expectations on yourself, so if you keep putting expectations on your kids, you're going to be more stressed out. And I really think that this is a time to just let yourselves be, let your feelings be, and find ways to reconnect with your family and your friends. And again, that doesn't mean you have to have high quality interactions all the time. We're not going to get there. No one can actually do that all the time. So really lowering expectations across all levels, and maybe finding out what is it like when we lower expectations.
Yeah, a totally different feeling. Dr. Erin Hunter, a clinical psychologist at the University of Michigan, the interim director of the University Center for the Child and the Family. Thank you. It is always good to talk to you, and you always give us something to think about and kind of help take the next step. And thank you for being helpful for so many people.
Everyone out there, take care.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.